From script to screen, every film is brought to life by visionary creatives and executives, all sharing one mission: to captivate the audience. Hosted by award-winning movie strategist Kevin Goetz, our podcast, Don't Kill the Messenger, offers a filmmaking masterclass through intimate conversations with Hollywood's most influential voices. And now, your host, Kevin Goetz.
Helping filmmakers get their films funded, shot, and seen. That's the mission of my guest today. And his latest book, Greenlight Signals, is a groundbreaking data report that distills years of research into what audiences respond to and what separates profitable films from those that fall short. Using secondary data, millions of existing reviews, ratings, and comments from across the internet, Stephen mapped audience reactions by genre against box office results. Stephen Follows is a UK-based film industry analyst who specializes in data-driven research. He's consulted for Guinness World Records, advised both studios and independent filmmakers, and taught at top institutions like the National Film and Television School and NYU. I wanted Stephen on the show because we both explore the same topic, film profitability, but from very different angles. Two perspectives meeting in the middle of art and commerce. Stephen, welcome to my show.
Thank you so much for inviting me. And I loved your book. I don't know whether people come on and say this to you all the time, but I genuinely really loved it. And it was great to see the same things as you just said that we were both looking into from different places.
Let me ask you something. Are you talking about Audienceology, my first book, or are you talking about How to Score in Hollywood? Because I know we sent you an advanced copy.
It's the exclusive one, the new one, How to Score in Hollywood. Yeah, that was very eye-opening and also hugely relieving, because had you found the opposite things to me, we might have had beef.
Thank you, by the way, for that plug without even talking for 2 minutes. So I'm very appreciative of that. Stephen, we really do have so much in common. We share a very similar philosophy. I'm curious to know what got you into even taking this project on. Are you a movie guy? Do you come from movies first and foremost, like myself? Or are you more of a research guy that comes from it from this looks like a compelling area to explore? Why not?
Well, I can tell you that the only people that think I'm any kind of scientist are people in the film industry. Real scientists do not. And I know because I have plenty of friends who are. So my background is that I knew as a teenager that I wanted to do something in film and something in thinking. I like working things out from first principles, and I didn't know where that would lead me. And everyone told me, go to college and study film, because I'm a contrarian. So I went to film school and I became a producer, and I made short film content, and I made professional short film content. And I actually have a production company where we raise money for charities using storytelling, and we make commercials and things like that. So that sort of evolved over the last 20 years. But maybe 15 years ago, as it was starting to take off and I was starting to realize that I could make short form content online and in commercials, it was moving further and further away from feature films, which has always been a big love of mine, both as a consumer, but also just being involved in the industry. And so I thought, you know what, I will take on the mission to myself of using that part of my brain, the thinking part within film. And very few other people are doing it, as you know. So I started sharing these things I would find. And then over doing this now for a decade and a half, I've started to find people come to me with strange questions. They come to me with strange requests. And I look where other people aren't looking, because that's what's interesting to me. So I have no useful career advice for anyone who wants to follow in my footsteps, because I have no idea how I've done this. But I definitely feel I am a film person primarily. And then I use logic and data to try and just explain what we already know sometimes, or see what's happening and perhaps understand why.
Well, I think very interestingly, you and I come from a similar place of left and right brain, and the idea that we would not be satisfied if we didn't scratch both of those itches. Would that be a fair statement?
Oh, 100%. One of the things I love about film is that it's sort of unsolvable. It's not like checkers where, you can calculate the best possible move. There is no one single formula. And even if there were, we would all smash it to bits in the first 6 months and it wouldn't work. So what I love is that we have to keep thinking and reimagining. But at the same time, the audiences are similar. We're all humans. We all want stories. We all have the same sort of feelings. So there is this continuity and this demand for freshness. And that's everything I need to keep my brain going.
Yeah, the art is what I keep coming back to. It's an art form. And so we're playing in dangerous territory for people who are purists and just working with that part of the brain. but we are not trying to impede or interrupt or usurp your art. We're trying to help you make money doing what you love to do. Because I have a theory, which we're going to unpack in the second half of our program, that, as you know, every movie, if made and marketed for the right price, should make money. And that's a big claim, but I do stand by it, and I want to get your opinion on it in a moment. But I do want to probe where Steven sort of got formed in terms of his love of movies.
Well, I had quite a formative experience. I mean, I was out of film school. I produced a couple of micro-budget features, and I decided that producing wasn't really for me.
I'm going back further, Steven. I mean, did something inform you? Did you see a particular movie? Did you go to the movies on a regular basis? Did you have a nostalgia and a sort of a sentimentality around movies?
Well, I remember seeing Jurassic Park with my dad in the theaters, and that was quite an amazing thing. But I think there's a good story of teenage Stephen, which might reveal a little bit more about me as well.
Perfect.
Which is that we were told, I don't know how old I was, maybe 14 or something, that we could do any sport we wanted to on Wednesday afternoons. And I didn't want to do all the sports they were offering. So I said, can I organize my own thing? Can we go 10-pin bowling? And the school said, you know what, you go do that. And the first week we went bowling. But then the second week, we realized there was a movie theater next door. And for the next 2 years, me and about 10 of us went to see a movie on our parents' dime on school hours every Wednesday afternoon. Some weeks there wasn't another movie out or something we wanted to see. So we'd see the same movie twice. So I saw My Best Friend's Wedding, the Julia Roberts film, 2 weeks in a row. We just saw movies at least once a week and then at the weekend as well. And I think that came from my love of movies. I don't think that built my love of movies. But at a time where, I mean, there were VHSs. This is just before DVDs. So it was harder to sort of overdose on movies. But having a regularity to it, you start to see things beyond just the experience of the movie. You're like, why did I like that? Why did I not like that? Or you see a genre you wouldn't normally see. And there was an art house cinema down the road from me, which was separate to this bowling expedition, where I learned to trust whatever they programmed. So I saw Pi, Aronofsky's first film, not knowing anything. Like I walked in, just one, please. Or I saw double bills where they would show 2 Hitchcock films. And I just learned that whatever they were showing, I could just turn up and I would be experiencing something fascinating. And I think that is what really connected me with the wider thing of cinema. It wasn't just I had a genre or a particular actor or director that I followed. I liked cinema. And then whatever came to me this week was that flavor of cinema.
What were some of your favorite movies back then?
I really liked when I started watching Hitchcock films. I think there was a retrospective at the BFI and the British Film Institute in the South Bank of London, and they started showing all the Hitchcock films. And I started to go and see all of them over the course of a few months. And that was kind of special because I had to get over something. I had to get over the fact they seemed very derivative. I had to get over the fact I'd seen them in The Simpsons and I'd seen them here and here. And then I had to really understand, no, they've been copied. And then once the penny drops, you're like, oh my goodness, there was an audience who saw that thing for the first time.
That's right. Alfred Hitchcock was indeed a very singular talent. It's funny, we just had several guests on my program who were talking about the kind of filmmaker like a Billy Wilder or a Willy Wyler or a Steven Spielberg or a Ron Howard who do so many different genres and don't have necessarily a distinct style, but they're good in everything they touch. I just saw a documentary on George Stevens, same thing. Yet there are some filmmakers like a Quentin Tarantino, Scorsese, Hitchcock, for example, that when you see the style of the filmmaking, you know who the filmmaker is. And I just think that's an interesting juxtaposition. I want to ask you, though, for me, sitting in audiences, and you know what I do, I test movies. I mean, I do a lot of things in the movie business, but one of the things I'm most known for is the testing of pre-released movies. So I've worked on over 5,000 titles, and I've been in thousands and thousands of screenings. And one of the things that got me to write the book, How to Score in Hollywood, was that I would look and say, how did they make the movie for that? I heard that the budget was so-and-so, and that is ridiculous. This is such a particular movie. It's not a broad recommendation. They've got to be losing money. And then I would unpack that. This is over years. And it finally got me so interested, I suppose, and maybe frustrated as well, that I wrote the book. Do you have a similar story around why you ended up getting into Greenlight Signals?
Yeah, I do actually. So 15 years ago, when I started doing my own little data research projects, it wasn't intentional to publish them. I started helping friends who were writing business plans. And I had one particular friend who I think he had done a favor for me or something, but I really wanted to help him above and beyond. I really like, this is my chance.
Like for a production company or something?
Yeah. He was a producer putting together a package. He'd produced some films before. He was putting together his business plan. He knew I was number literate and interested in doing this. And he said, can you come and help me make a credible case for this movie? And I'm like, yep. I'm there, I can do it. So I read the script and I started gathering data on all sort of similar movies. And then I started understanding more about the flows of money. I understood some before, but I did lots of deep research. And I kept proving that all the films I looked at lost money. And I kept thinking, how have I done this wrong? Honestly, I was apologetic to him and I'd go back to people. And at some point, and I can't remember exactly when, the penny dropped. Oh my God, they did all lose money. And so I was like, well, what? I was initially sort of confused and I was like, oh, I don't understand how that's happened. But then I thought, oh my God, I'm going to have to go back to this guy and tell him, I'm really sorry. All these ones lost money and I don't know why. So I sat down with him and I said, look, I can't explain why, but all of the films that are similar to yours have lost money. And he said, yeah, I know, I'm still going to make mine. And I was like, oh, that's why they lost money. Because people are making them for passion reasons, certainly on the lower budgets, and they're not listening to the data. And maybe they shouldn't. I didn't then tell him not to make it or whatever. It was a really important moment, a two-punch, where you realize there's a lot of films that lose money. And second of all, clearly, the number one driver in the film industry is not money. It's just not. These people would do other things if they exclusively wanted money. Now, they do want money, but not exclusively.
I do talk about that in my book. In any industry that you are driven by the driving force of money is never a good idea. It is just not a good motivating factor for success. You have to have the passion and the goods behind it. But again, my theory is that why wouldn't you try to make money each and every time out so that you could make another one? If for no other reason, because you may have a passion project, it loses money, and that person who gave you that money is not going back to give you more. And so that's why I wanted to help filmmakers primarily and studio folks so that they could stay in these jobs for a long time. Not to mention, any business is about making money, and it is a business first and foremost. And that doesn't mean you can't also make great art. I also want to ask you, was there a moment when you realized that data could illuminate patterns that most people in Hollywood only sensed sort of intuitively?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I did a series of projects for about 3 or 4 years with Bruce Nash, who runs the Numbers website, the box office site and consultancy site. And they do amazing stuff. They have really good data. And he and I got to know each other and we managed to convince the AFM, the American film market. They gave us a little bit of money 3 or 4 times a year to do some little data projects. And then they would put it out in their newsletter exclusively. And we got to research this. And it was a lovely deal. It was all pre-pandemic and stuff. And one of the ones we looked at was we looked at the correlation between the number of films a producer had made in the past. So how experienced are they basically in making films? And the chances of their next film being profitable. Just if there was no other information about it, what are the patterns? Because what you'd expect to see is experience equals better outcomes. You'd hope to see that generally, right? It may be bumpy, but you'd expect as you get better at doing the job, you have better outcomes. And we found no correlation or even a slightly negative correlation. And we went back to the AFM and said, I think we've proven that experience means nothing when it comes to profitability. Are you okay with that? We're not going to change the results, but this might cause a riot. And Jonathan, the AFM, just said, oh, a riot's fine. It'll go out on the newsletter. But it really made us stop and think, okay, well, what is going on here? Because again, we wanted to, in this case, check whether we were right or not. It was counterintuitive.
Sure.
And then we thought about it and we're like, okay, what is the feedback loop here? What are the negative consequences of making a film that loses money? Well, actually, in the real world, they're very small. You don't get your artistic license revoked. And most producers on the lower end are bouncing between investors anyway, because an investor...
That's not true when it comes to directors.
Exactly. We have completely different rules because we judge directors based on the art and all that kind of stuff. Whereas the producers, they have different investors along the way. And actually, the real job of a producer is to convince someone it will get made so that it does get made. Now, I think ethically, they should also be returning the money. And I'm not advocating for a new fall every week. But it is true that actually, if you only had to have one skill as a producer, it's in convincing people that you'll make money, not actually making money. And so you obviously want to do all the things, but it was interesting to see in the data that actually the integrity and the business sustainability and professionalism are choices producers make. They're not essential into the
I think,
job.
honestly, you need both. That's my feeling. And I've also produced more than a dozen movies, and more than a dozen means 13. So I know something about producing and making money doing it. I would not agree that a producer is there to just convince people. I wouldn't trust that person if they're going to sell me. I recently had a friend who produced a movie that failed at the box office, and he sold it to the studio head as, this is not an independent film, as you all think. This is Cannes meets Kansas. And I was like, okay, I heard that. And I said, no, this is Cannes meets Antibes. Do you know what I mean? Like, this is...
Yeah, it's just in the mountains.
This is just like really within the zip code of Cannes. And yet it was made for way too much money as a result, and the rest is history, very, very sadly, because it's a wonderful picture, but it was never going outside of what it was in its DNA. And so that's one of my points. I do also want to ask you, do you find that filmmakers and executives today are more open to using data than they were like 10 or 15 years ago?
That's a great question. Honestly, I think they are. I'm not sure they actually are, because I think that most of the people in the film industry are there for reasons in large part to do with passion, whether it's art or passion for a story or because of a lifestyle. And so if the data were to show that you shouldn't do something, what would you then do? Would you change the project? Would you cancel the project? Or would you carry on regardless, making tiny tweaks? And I think this is a good thing, by the way. I'm not suggesting people are ignorant or that data should lead anything. I don't want to live in that world. It would not be better. Obviously, the effect of the streamers and Silicon Valley's influence in the film industry over the last 10 years has had a major effect, and we all do need to be far more data literate. But I would say that the core of being a film professional is about creating work that moves people, stories that move people outside of the art. So like, how can you convince people this film should get made, and the story of yourself and your company? I mean, there is a point where the rubber hits the road. If you've lost money 10 features in a row, not only do you not have any money, you're not going to have any more. And I do think a good producer finds it easier and easier as their career goes on, and a bad or incompetent or shady producer finds it harder and harder as time goes on, because word gets around.
That's my point, Stephen. Yeah, that's exactly my point. People will be found out because you still need to get in those rooms and sell. And if your credibility is questioned, you're going to have a far more difficult time getting something greenlit.
No, you're totally right there. I think the thing is that you can get very far on words alone, but you can't make something good. And most crucially, and as you know, the audience don't care about any of this stuff. So you say it's a hotly anticipated movie, it was on the blacklist, this person was bidding versus that. Yeah, whatever. When it comes to the theater or watching it on TV, they're ruthless. They'll turn it off. They won't buy it. They won't recommend it. Or if you had to work uphill for 20 years and had to cut the budget 100 times and you make something that moves people, they'll tell everyone they know. They'll buy it again. They'll buy the soundtrack. And so I think there's a lot that goes on in the industry where we have to do stuff for gatekeepers, and we become gatekeepers, and we echo the same truisms, some of which are entirely true, some are kind of true, and some are downright false. But if the person standing in front of you believes something, you have to functionally kind of believe it. But all of that has just something to get over, because the audience will be honest and the audience will do what they want to do. And so that's why your kind of work is so useful, because you're trying to use the evidence of what will happen inevitably, that's what's going to happen, early in the process to improve it, and also to show the gatekeepers who might have a different view, no, actually, you're wrong in this case.
Somebody asked me the other day in an article promoting the book, are you ever wrong in your assessment of movies and pre-Greenlight research or playability research, as we call a screening? I said, I'm wrong every day. I'm always wrong. The audience, on the other hand, is never wrong. And I mean that because all the audience is doing is giving you their opinions, their unfettered opinions based on what they're seeing. So they don't have an agenda. They just want to enjoy something. Maybe if you want to call that an agenda, they just want to be entertained. But they don't come in with their arms crossed, say, show me. They just want to sit there and really enjoy it. And so when you ask them, did you enjoy it? And what was the level of your enjoyment? And how intense was that? And your passionate advocacy is either there or not there. Why not listen to that? If in fact you're making it for these people, I think you need to include them from the get-go as soon as the art is formed, and ignore them at your own peril.
Well, I think it also reveals why people are doing things like, because if you're into the industry, hypothetically, let's say somebody who's only in there for their own ego, their own power, whatever, then actually there's not much interest in them listening to this stuff because it could prove them wrong. But if you're genuinely trying to make a good piece of art, you're trying to make a responsible business decision, you're trying to make a sustainable career with people who are going to trust you, you absolutely should listen to it. And so if I were to advise, and I do quite often advise investors and people doing slates and things like that, the questions that you really want to ask, not is, do you think this will make money, but like, what evidence would change your mind about the investment?
Yes,
and would make you go back into something you said no, or vice versa. Because if people say, no data would prove we shouldn't make this, well, then you're not making a rational decision.
Well, that's exactly my next question, which was, in your view, what's the biggest misunderstanding that filmmakers, particularly filmmakers, have about data in general?
They think it's prescriptive, and it's not. It's just the weather forecast. And that means two things. Number one, it means that it might be wrong, but also it means that even if 19 out of 20 things have failed, first of all, not all of them have failed, but also everything is based on the past performance. Pirates don't work until Pirates of the Caribbean. Historical films don't work until Gladiator. I don't know. People over-invest in the specificity of the whole thing. And I think there's a danger in looking what has happened and then saying that will happen. And that's not how we live our lives. I mean, it's useful information, but ultimately you have to take a really good look around, really understand what's happened before, watch the films, listen to the audience, and then choose what you make. And that is your artistic voice. That is your business opinion. That's what makes you, you. That's what you were talking earlier on about, the creative voice that threads through directors' films, even when they're telling different stories of different characters. There's the same for business as well.
Yeah, you and I both talk about the fact that data doesn't dictate decisions, it guides them. And what do you think are the most valuable questions that good data helps creative leaders ask?
I think the question to ask is, what will your audience be expecting from your film? And then part two, what are you going to do with that expectation? So if they're turning up to a Western, you've titled it a certain thing, you know the color of the poster, you know what it looks like. Okay, so you can tell me now that based on the information the audience are reasonably going to get, which is the tiny bits of fragments we give them, they're going to expect this kind of journey. And then there's a whole side journey you can go down. Is that a big enough audience? Can you find them? Blah, blah, blah. But number one, what are the reasonable expectations your audience are going to have when they are presented with a little bits of evidence about your movie and then they sit there and the movie opens? Secondly, what are you going to do with those expectations? Because if you are just on some fronts going to deliver really well, make sure you deliver really well. What is the core tenets of a thriller? What do they want? But if you're going to subvert them because that's what your art is, then great, but really subvert them. Don't misalign them.
Yes.
Don't kind of give them, because as you put in your book, you're giving them like a fudge of things. So what are your audience's expectations and what are you going to do with those expectations? I don't think that is in any way limiting to art, in any way, because it doesn't tell you what to do. It just forces you to be aware.
100%. The other part of that, of course, is how big is that audience?
Absolutely.
Size them up correctly. That's where most people fail. They don't know what they have.
Yeah.
Every movie should work because there's an audience for everyone. When we come back, we're going to talk to Stephen Follows specifically about some of those tenets that he just referenced, and also unpacking my theory about every movie, if made and marketed for the right price, should make money. We'll be back in a moment. If you're curious about how movies actually turn a profit, I've got something for you. My upcoming book, How to Score in Hollywood, dives into the intersection of creative instinct and audience insight, and where the business of film meets the art of storytelling. The book is available for pre-order now on your favorite bookseller platform. I'm also putting together a book launch team, and I'd love for you to be a part of it. We're looking for people to help spread the word ahead of our November release, and also to leave a short book review after its release. In exchange, you'll get early access to the book, exclusive behind-the-scenes content, and more. Sign up to join my launch team or for book updates at kevingetz360.com. And as always, thank you for your support. We're back with Stephen Follows. Stephen, you've analyzed more than 10,000 films and over 4 million audience responses. What surprises you most about the difference between what audiences say they like and what they actually respond to?
That's a really good question. I think people will say they want things that are more complex than they actually want. I think when you look at people's behavior, it's a lot easier to intuit it. And it just doesn't sound as impressive to say it. When you ask people, what do you want from a movie? They might give you a highfalutin answer. But if you look at their behavior, what they actually want is to be entertained and immersed and to live a life with somebody else, whether it's they're jumping off a rooftop or crying because their child has died, whatever the journey is emotionally that people want to go through, they want to be taken somewhere else and really feel it. And they want it to be an emotional experience that complements the way they want to feel, the way that if you're having breakup, you might listen to certain music or something like that. But I think it sounds almost dumb to say it out loud.
I think that's right. And I like to say, I'm not so sure audiences can tell you what they want. And many of my colleagues agree. I think they can absolutely tell you what they don't want. For example, I'm holding up my iPhone here. And if Steve Jobs had said, what would you like to see in the future with your telecommunications or your cameras or your computer, they would not have the ability to identify a 3-in-1 device that's 5 inches or whatever long and so forth. What the F? This can't be, right? And yet they could say, I want that. I've got to have that. And so I think an example very similar to a movie, when I do what we call capability testing, which is pre-Greenlight testing, essentially concept testing on steroids, and you're adding sequentially lift items to see if this influences your decision or if this influences. But what I love is when I test a concept and right out of the gate, people are like, oh yeah, I'm in. You know you have something, period, full stop. So let's educate our listeners on some of the ways you unpack the tenets of different genres. First of all, you deal with about 18 genres. Is that correct?
That's right, yeah.
Can you rattle them off really quickly? Because I want people to hear how you, in your analytical mind, see movies separated by genre.
Genre is such a broken system that works in the sense that whenever you try and pick it up, it's like sand between your fingers. And yet we all know what it is. And so I think of genre as a shorthand to the emotional experience. So what's the difference between, say, thriller and action? The lazy answer is the budget. The real answer is to do with, I think, emotional danger. I think a thriller is unsettling, whereas an action film doesn't necessarily have to be. And so the same between a music-based film or a musical. You know, do they know they're singing? But also, what's the kind of experience we're going to get? You probably get a rawer journey in a music-based film than you do in a musical. Musical is much more...
Right. Music-based musicals, do you separate them, for example?
I do, yeah.
So do I, because I'm working on the Springsteen movie right now. I worked on the Bob Dylan movie, and you're going to compare it to, say, Bohemian Rhapsody or Wicked. You know, they're totally different experiences. Or the word, I know you use animated as a catch-all, but animated is a proxy probably for children's animation or for all audience animation. But, you know, there's animation that is strictly adult animation. So it's not really a genre per se, but we've kind of adopted it, haven't we, as a genre?
Of course. And almost all the genres are kind of broken in some way, you know, like about...
I love this one. We don't use it anymore, and I don't think you do either. Foreign films.
No, indie, yeah.
You're a Brit, but in America, a foreign film included in that would be a British movie with people speak like you talk, you know, and that's how. But that is not the case because even foreign films are separated into genres. So I find it very fascinating. So can you rattle off your 18? Do you have that list?
So, I mean, and you're right that, by the way, you know, animation is a format, Western is a setting, comedy is how you're going to feel. Drama is 60% of movies, and
100%.
Drama. That's not effective. But yeah, so I've got thriller, drama, action, comedy, horror. I've got family as well, which is an audience one, but, you know, romance, animation, biography, fantasy, sport, sci-fi, music, war. It's interesting. Western is a genre, but I couldn't study Westerns because there are so few and they perform so poorly that studying the long-term trends of successful Westerns is incredibly hard.
But there was a time in the 1950s and 60s where the Western ruled. So you can go back and look at some of the data to see what was it about that time. And it really has a lot to do with the frontier and the American dream at that point. It touched particularly Americans and people around the world of a certain feeling, and that's from my own analysis that I've conducted. But there's a lot to learn from historical films as well. It's not all about post-COVID, as I know you would attest to or agree with.
Quite often, two things may look very similar, but then you use a different dimension and they look very different. So music and musical, for example, the levels of swearing and drug taking in music-based films is very high. And in musicals, it's very low. Like, Moulin Rouge may have absinthe, but it's fundamentally not a druggy film, whereas Almost Famous is.
What would you call I Want to Dance with Somebody, the Whitney Houston biopic?
There is a huge amount of crossover. So I'm not going to I'm not going to go around.
No, because I worked on that. It was very challenging because here it is. It's a biopic at its core, right? But yes, there's a lot of drug use in it because obviously she had substance abuse issues, Whitney, and really throwing away her talent on these terrible drugs. So you're right. It could be very much a part of the fabric, but it's not what it's about.
No, and it all depends on audience expectations. If you were to tell someone only this is a musical, what would they expect? And the thing is that often different people can be sold the same movie in different ways and still get what they want from it. And I noticed this recently when I was looking at romances, and the Tom Hanks film Castaway is listed as a romance on IMDb. And I thought, is it him and the ball? I'm not sure. That's a different kind of romance. But it's interesting because it depends on whether you think of that as having a romantic driver. And the real truth is we are making 2-hour-long, incredibly complex narrative, emotional journeys, and multiple things can apply. Where it really matters is how are you going to package it and how are you going to market it and who are you going to attract with it, because that really does make a difference. Once they're in the theater, you can take them on a nuanced journey. But if you're promising them something and then they say, okay, I accept your promise, I trust you, I will give you my time and my money, and then you don't deliver on that, that's a real problem.
Yes, it is.
So one of the strongest signals I found was matching the expectation with the movie. So when people feel missold, for whatever reason, I think the Danny Boyle film from many years ago, Sunshine, is a horror film, really, or at least it has horror film vibes, but it was sold as a big budget sci-fi because there weren't any big budget sci-fis out that week or that month. And so a lot of people, myself included, felt missold. Now, had we been sold what it was, we might have enjoyed it already. This isn't actually to comment on the movie.
This is why my book focuses on the pre-Greenlight stage, this particular book. Audienceology, my first book, focused on the playability stage. What you're referring to is marketability, which very few filmmakers have any control over. So the difference of our interpretations, our analysis of what makes a successful movie or doesn't, is really centered on using secondary data after the movie's released, looking back on it, as opposed to stuff that I'm doing, which is more first-party data, talking to hundreds, thousands, I don't know, could be in the millions of moviegoers over nearly 4 decades that I've been doing this. But at the end of the day, there are certain truths, and it's great to impart these things. And if somebody can have that power over a campaign or an influence in a campaign, certainly do it with a lot of what you're saying. I just want to point out that the frustrating part is, what can a filmmaker do early on to look out for? What are some of those pink flags or yellow flags that we should know? So let's unpack horror for just a moment. Talk to me, if you would, Stephen, about what you would say to a filmmaker saying, I have a new horror movie. I don't know if it should be PG-13 or R. I don't know if it should be slasher, creature, sci-fi, exorcism / ghost, torture porn, all of these subgenres of horror. What do you say to them?
Well, horror is in a genre where it's an emotional experience. It's one where the audience strap themselves in and they lose control. They lose control of where they're looking, what they're hearing, what they're feeling, and they give it over to the filmmaker. So you have to think about what's the ride you're taking them on. And that is so much bigger than just the jump scares or the graphic details. Even if you are making something that is designed to be very graphic, the whole thing, the atmosphere, the anticipation, that is what it is. So it's about making fear feel like it's part of a world. So you want to create a world that they're excited and maybe a little bit worried to get into. And then you need to take on that responsibility that what you've done is build a roller coaster. You've strapped them in super tight. They can't get out. They're not going to move. And you now have to take them up, and down and left and right and all that sort of stuff. But you are in control of what they hear. You are in control of what they see. You're in control of what they know. And you should use that to take that atmosphere as long as you can. And it's interesting how different studies looking from different angles will discover the same thing, as you just said. And one of the things that I discovered a few years ago was I was looking at the average shot length. How long is the average shot? And obviously the shortest genre is action. That's not a surprise. But the longest was horror. When I initially did it, I was a bit surprised. And then I realized, no. That's because you can't see round the corner. You have to wait until that thing comes out the shadows. This is about control. Horror is essentially about controlling everything the audience know and feel and using that to take them constantly on their edge and occasionally drop them in something with a jump scare or graphic detail or a revelation, whatever it is, whether it's physical or an emotional journey. But it's not just those moments. You're not just filling time until those jump scares.
I'm going to give you a few areas in many horror films that come up as problematic in the testing process. Number one, they have not declared themselves as a horror movie until too far into the movie.
100%.
You're finding that too in your research?
100%. And audiences hate that. They hate that so much.
That's right.
And also, they don't deserve that because horror is not a genre that anyone should be unclear. We don't have to use the word consent here, but it's kind of that. I mean, that's what happened with Terrifier 3. You remember there were those stories in the press about audiences storming out. That's because the previews that they did this for, they weren't told it's a horror film. And Terrifier 3 is not a movie you should see unless you want to see Terrifier 3. And so they got the news and PR value they wanted. These weren't horror fans walking out of a horror film. But to do that on a mass scale with your normal release is just wrong and not going to work.
Yeah, it comes out as a cash play.
Yes.
The other thing that we discover is that there are not enough scares in the movie. One of the kisses of death are when I ask filmmakers, we're about to test their movie, describe your movie to me, they say, it's kind of a psychological thriller. And psychological thriller is a thriller. It is not a horror movie. And I think just what you were saying before is very true. It usually is a proxy for it's not very scary, but it's intriguing. You know what I mean?
I've got another one of them.
Yeah.
A dark comedy isn't funny. And obviously there are great dark comedies, but the idea of what are you fundamentally delivering? Scares, humor, emotional journey, roller coaster, adrenaline. What is the drug that you're injecting into people?
Right.
And are you delivering enough of that to give them what they're paying for?
To that point, are you delivering enough is your operative word there, because I think that what I'm sensing is what is working now in the theaters is elevated this or elevated that. It's elevated horror. It's elevated comedy. It's elevated drama. It's why Oppenheimer, for example, as a drama, where dramas typically are much more challenging to work theatrically, has a very underlying tension and intensity that elevates it, plus the cast they have and the Christopher Nolan of it all. But even innately of what that subject matter is elevating. A horror movie, like what makes a horror movie crash and burn versus one that sort of really takes off. Megan, the first Megan, was an example of something that was different enough and had enough humor in it that elevated it. It, the Stephen King book, of course, helped elevate it, or The Conjuring. Those are elevated. What makes Black Phone and Black Phone 2 now more elevated than another movie? And the answer is, I think, the stakes, the number of scares, those set pieces, and a certain rhythm. The other thing, and I'd like to hear your opinion about this, is, of course, the all-important ending. The ending of a horror movie can't just end. It has to deliver something else, whether it's a twist that no one saw coming. That usually is a way to amp up scores, and when I say amp up scores, increase your definite recommend, which is what the goal is.
I couldn't agree more. I mean, there's a theory which I'm sure you know about from psychology called peak end theory, which is that the two bits that people remember most of an experience is the peak and the end. And they discovered this through, I think, colonoscopies, where they were like, whether and if they made the last bit of the process, whatever that would be, the most uncomfortable, people rated it quite negatively. But if they made the procedure longer in time, but the ending was less of a problem, people rated it better. And so I have a theory that we'll move on from colonoscopies to movies, totally different. But we'll talk about peak end, where you've got two emotional experiences you have to consider with the movie, or two of the ones, they're not the only two, but the two heightened ones. What's the peak of this movie and what's the end? And my theory is when those two align, when the ending is the peak, it creates an extra, like the feeling squared. And you look at movies like Argo, I think quite an average movie with a terrific ending went on to win Best Picture. And Shawshank Redemption, obviously a great picture throughout, but at the same time, that ending is elevating. So I really believe that it works across all genres, although you're absolutely right that things like horror and thriller need more of a resolution. And family films need a resolution. One of the most important things about family films is catharsis. It needs to be a sealed box, whereas you could probably get away with a drama being like, well, did they ever really love each other? That's fine. But with horror, definitely, it needs to be a nice contained box. You've been on a ride, and ideally, the ending is inevitable but surprising. I never saw that coming, but now I think about it, that makes perfect sense.
Exactly. I think your protagonist has to solve whatever was in their way and has to have some kind of catharsis and a feeling of, I went through this for 2 hours with you all, or we went through this with you, protagonist, and therefore I want to know that you're going to be okay.
Yeah.
When you have what I call a zombie ending, and I don't literally mean a zombie ending, I mean like of somewhere where you're left hanging in a very ambiguous way, usually those don't work. And I try to tell people that it could work, but often the audience needs to be pushed in a direction as opposed to leaving it completely up to them. I will say that one of the things I'm very intrigued about, and I'd like to talk about now across all genres, so forget the genre, what are some of the commonalities of success, period? Now, I want to say to our listeners, and I know Stephen's going to support me in this, we are not advocating for one way or another. The world is scattered with all kinds of examples that defy the generalizations. But we, Stephen and I, live in research. We are talking in terms of most movies or a majority of films or a preponderance of a particular genre does this, does that. We're not talking about the exceptions. I have about 5 or 6 movies in my company that no one is allowed to bring up because they defied all odds, like My Big Fat Greek Wedding. I just can't
Napoleon
explain
Dynamite.
Yeah. Well, even that wasn't a huge financial success. Maybe it was from profitability. But My Big Fat Greek Wedding, there's no way it should have done what it did, but it did. And it was whatever the timing was, lightning in a bottle, etc. There's several movies like that. Even Paranormal Activity to a degree was like that. But even more than that, Blair Witch Project. Why did that suddenly, that new found footage movie, and maybe because it was the first one out of the gate that really touched an audience, but those movies are almost inexplicable as to why they so dramatically succeeded. Okay, so some of the things that I see in overall movies are that an ending needs to be both intellectually satisfying, but maybe even more importantly, emotionally satisfying. Both together, working in tandem. So you're getting your questions answered intellectually, you're getting the I's dotted and the T's crossed, but you're also feeling something like you've been through this experience. And it doesn't have to be a happy ending, but it has to be a fulfilling and satisfying one. Would you agree with that?
Oh, 100%. And I think those two things can also be in conflict sometimes. And they talk in screenwriting about you give your character what they need, not what they want, and the conflict of those two things. But they have to resolve. You have to feel like there was a literal truth to it. It has to make sense, but it has to be an emotional truth to it as well. It has to feel like it makes sense. And I think that those two things are not always the same. And I think sometimes they'll say, well, this logically makes sense. But if it doesn't feel authentic, if it doesn't feel like it works, then it's for nothing. You need both. And you're absolutely right, by the way. I do second everything you just said. And I also think that these aren't hard rules, every single one. But the way I would think about it, rather than see this as a checklist of things you must do, I would see this as the more of these rules you're violating, the higher risk you're going down the path.
That's exactly what I'm saying. Mitigating risk is what my whole book is about. How do I help you, and how do you do the same in your book, Stephen? Help not only filmmakers, studio executives, producers, or anybody starting a business of any sort. If you think about it, the principles are very, very similar. How can you understand what are commonalities, causes, causations, or correlations? What are the different elements, alchemy, that seem to make successful movies? Do you agree or not agree with my theory of every movie, if made and marketed for the right price, should make money?
Yeah, I think so. I think obviously, actually, no, even if I think of the weirdest possible movie, there'll be somebody else that will want it.
That's exactly right. But if you know that only 6 people want to see that, and as you read in my book there, I use the example of a movie called Dirt. It's a movie about dirt, soil. You may have one botanical garden YouTube channel that will give you $6,000 for that. But if you make it for $7,000, you're going to lose $1,000.
Yeah,
because
exactly.
Shame on you to not know that there are only that few number of folks that want to see it, and doing research beforehand to know from the buyers out there what they're willing to pay. Because I can't tell you how many people have said over the years, guess what? I made this movie for, you're not going to believe this, $125,000. And I go, what does that mean? You might have made it for $100,000 too much. And so understanding what you have, the size of that audience, and mitigating your risk all along the way is so important. You said something additionally very important. You used the word authenticity, probably one of the most important words across genres that I can think of.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. That was one of the ones that came up across everything. People wanted to feel authentic. And it becomes especially interesting in historical films because we don't know whether it's authentic, but we know whether it feels authentic. So the language, there's actually a psychological theory here called the Tiffany problem, which is that the first name Tiffany is actually quite an old name. There were people in the 1300s in England called Tiffany, but it doesn't feel like that. It feels like that should be a valley girl or something. And so when you have a character in the 1600s called Tiffany, it feels wrong, even if it's actually accurate. So the emotional accuracy is incredibly important. But you were talking before about like, what are the signals that work across most genres in most cases? And I've got a few here. So I think make sure people know what's going on. So, for example, there's a big difference between...
world building, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's a big difference between mystery and confusion. We like mystery. Not knowing is fine, but confusion is uncomfortable. And even in a horror film, if you take the genre where you want to feel most uncomfortable, confusion can't last a long time. It's mysterious, wanting to know, feeling out of the loop. That's all good.
I call it intrigue versus frustration.
Well, there we go. And those things are so different.
So different. Good confusions versus bad confusions, if you will.
Exactly. So number one, don't confuse people for any length of time, ideally not at all. I think don't make it too long. I'm not going to give a hard list to it, but the number of times people have said that movie was too short is probably, can count on one hand, and how many people have seen a film that's too long, that's definitely something. I think from the data that sort of came out were give characters clear wants and visible stakes, that you know at least what they're after, even if they don't reach it, even if it's a MacGuffin, that's fine. But we need to know because we need to invest in them. You've already talked about one of them, which is ending on a very clear and emotional note, know where we're going.
Oh, wait, before you go on, going back to the stakes.
Sure.
Villain, the antagonist, specificity around your villain, so important. I want to save the world, or they want to save the world, is not a good reason for a villain to do what they're doing. We want to know why, what's motivating them. They're as important as a protagonist. You need to have a fully fleshed out antagonist, which speaks to the stakes again as well. Don't you agree?
Oh, 100%. And you have such a rich opportunity when creating a villain. You could do something simple, like create the antithesis of the hero so that you've got difference. Or you can do something slightly more complicated, which is to make them overlap. Isn't that interesting? They both went to the same high school. They're brothers. He's your twin.
Exactly.
Or you can do things that are so much more complicated. But what a great opportunity, because you actually have three things going on. You have everything that the hero is. You have everything that the villain is, and then you have the interplay of those two things, where they overlap, where they disagree, where they're not connected. And that is such rich opportunity that we're so movie literate as consumers and as audiences that we know that there should be a lot going on. So if you then don't use that, if it just happens to be that one's tall and one's short for no reason, what a waste. What a Chekhov's gun experience. And also, I'm then confused because I'm thinking, oh, this is going to come into play. And it doesn't. And it feels like there's threads everywhere. And it's very unsatisfying. Whereas when you have a villain that properly does something for the story and for the hero and for our journey, it feels so satisfying, especially if it's really conflicting. You know, when the villain has a great point, when the villain is fighting for something that we actually would support. I mean, Thanos did nothing wrong was a hashtag that went around during Endgame. And it's fantastic that you have in this fictional world, the person who has killed the most beings ever. And you have the audience going, well, I mean, he had a point. Like that is great character world building, and it really makes you enjoy the journey more.
The other thing is, don't break the rules. That's another huge no-no. You cannot set up a character as having super strength. For example, let's say they can pick up an object and throw it, kind of like Superman. But then you can't have Superman, if that were the case, walk through a wall in the third act and say, well, how was he able to do that?
Yeah. Why didn't you show me that before?
Exactly. Audiences will believe whatever you throw at them if you justify it in the world you're building. But if you breach that, they will turn on you.
There was a great example not that long ago where I was talking to a friend who was railing against The Last Jedi, the second Star Wars film from the more recent trilogy. And this is the Rian Johnson one. And it's the bit where Leia is in a spaceship and it explodes and she's in space and we think she's dead, but actually she flies like Superman back into safety, right? Now, this person was saying Jedis can't fly. And you have to pause for a second and say, in this sci-fi world set in a fantasy land, a thing that's made up called Jedis that already have special powers. Suddenly, this friend of mine felt so empowered to say what was and was not possible. And it's because he had never seen a Jedi fly before. And it was late in the movie and it violated exactly what you're saying. It violated what he understood as the rules. Had they set it up from the beginning, Jedis can fly, you would have gone, well, yeah, of course they can fly. And it was just the order of the information and the feeling. The audience felt that wasn't earned. And it was just such a fantastic example. They're in space. They're already mythical beings that can move things. But for some reason, that offended him.
Isn't that interesting? Any others that come to mind about commonalities?
Stick to one tone, I think. And that doesn't mean you have to paint with a simple color. The only exception I can think of as a consumer, now this is not to do with the data, is I love Dusk Till Dawn changing. But I was told it would. And I don't know what it would have been like to have been through that movie and see it change.
What did you think of Sinners?
I haven't seen Sinners yet.
Okay, Sinners is a genius movie, and part of its genius is the fact that it changes tone. It starts out more as a historical kind of drama and moves into this heavy zombie action movie towards the end. But the way in which Ryan Coogler sort of modulates it just works. But that's very tricky.
Yes.
And dare I say, highly sophisticated and requires a very deft hand. But generally speaking, when you change your tones, it does not work.
Completely. I mean, think about it when you're listening to a randomized playlist on Spotify and there's music, whether you're actively listening there with headphones or it's in the background.
Yeah.
If it suddenly has some other tune that you weren't expecting, it will feel incredibly discordant, even if it's a tune you like. You know, you're singing to Bohemian Rhapsody and then Tubular Bells comes on. It doesn't feel like it fits. The job of a DJ is to make it feel like there's a set that works. And when they get it wrong, it's incredibly apparent. And it's the same with a movie. You can't have that with a scene or with a character or a line, because fundamentally, one of the biggest things I found across all genres is about immersion. You know, when people feel like they're lost in the world of the movie, they are on board. But when they're aware they're watching a movie, or they're aware that they're late, or did they do the parking correctly, or my bum itches, or whatever it is, then they're out of the movie. And I know this from giving lots of talks over the years. I'm teaching in classrooms, but also keynotes and speaking in front of large audiences. I know they're with me when they move as one. When it feels like there is one audience and they either sit still or they're taking notes together or they're looking to the left together.
Do you know we record our audiences, by the way?
Really?
For the exact reason you're saying, 100%. Keep going. That's exactly right.
Yeah, so when they school, when they go together like fish and they go left together, right together, or they're silent together, you've got them. Whatever you're doing is working. When they are moving in different directions or fidgeting, I've lost them. No matter how intellectually great what I've said, how much they laughed at the joke 3 minutes ago, fundamentally, they are either one being, and that's success, or they are individuals, and I have failed. And I think that that's true with immersion in movies.
I would add to that set the stake up in the ground as early as possible to give the audience the ability to be on the same page, as opposed to having to slowly figure out, do I have permission to laugh here?
Yes.
Do I have permission to be scared here? Do you know what I mean? And so that's
100%.
why laying that out as early as possible is super important. We can talk forever. I think that you and I really are probably soul brothers. And I think we need to do a panel together. And I'm going to invite you to Los Angeles.
Oh, thank you.
And come and we can do something together. Because I think we are so aligned, come at it from slightly different ways. But the fact that I have an ally is very exciting for me. I thank you so much, Stephen, for all of your contributions and the amount of work you've put in to come to these conclusions. There are certainly things that will help mitigate your risk along the way.
Thank you so much for inviting me. I loved your book and I've really enjoyed chatting. I feel very grateful.
To our listeners, I hope you enjoyed this conversation. I encourage you to check out Stephen's book, Greenlight Signals, and to follow him on Substack. For more insights into filmmaking, audience testing, and the business of Hollywood, I invite you to check out my books, Audienceology and How to Score in Hollywood, at Amazon or through my website at kevingetz360.com. You can also follow me on my social media. Next time on Don't Kill the Messenger, I'll welcome former advertising executive, studio marketing head, and president and COO of Screen Engine, Bob Levin. Until then, I'm Kevin Goetz, and to you, our listeners, I appreciate you being part of the movie-making process. Your opinions matter.